Hi, it's Will from StormTheCastle.com, and here on YouTube you know me as Epic Fantasy, and it's 12 o'clock on a Friday. Let's go for a fish and chips. And in this episode I'm going to talk about something I call experiences and relationships. And it's a funny thing because if you follow my channel, my YouTube channel, you know that the last video I posted was at the Grand Canyon, how to take Milky Way photographs, and I even did an anime stop motion of the Milky Way, and I had a wonderful day that day for a few different reasons, but also a couple of things happened to me. Nothing bad, but a couple of little, I guess you could say, experiences and relationships on that very day that I'm going to tell you about to kind of, move my point here in this episode of my vlog slash podcast. So let's do the introduction, and then let's do Friday Fish and Chips, episode 26, Relationships and Experiences. Okay, so in this episode of Friday Fish and Chips, I said I would talk about relationships and experiences, and I'm going to tell you a story, two stories from the day and I guess the night that I shot the Milky Way uh, pictures and the Milky Way stop motion animation at the Grand Canyon. So let me launch right into that, and then I'll talk about more about relationships and experiences. I was in the beginning of the video. You saw me at the Grand Canyon during the day setting up my camera equipment and locating the Milky Way and getting all set up, getting ready to do the shoot later that in the evening. So it was a few hours later. I went around. I visited the Grand Canyon, looked at some things. During the day, I talked to the astronomers that were there with the telescopes, and I had a really wonderful day. And then it, slowly got dark. And, when it got dark, I said, okay, now it's time for me to set up and get ready to take my pictures and the spot I wanted to go to, the spot I had selected. So I went to my car and got all my camera stuff back out. After I'd set it up once already, I got my camera stuff and my lawn chair, and I was all my gear so I could be ready for at least a couple of hours. Was 3 or 4 hours out at night, late at night, taking pictures. And I was walking from my car in the dark to the location, and walking ahead of me was a little family, a mom and a dad and two young kids, maybe 10 or 12, somewhere around there, four of them. And they were clearly disoriented. They were looking around and they looked tired because it was a long day. They probably had been to the Grand Canyon all day long. And something was clearly going on with them, so I was looking at them, and thinking, oh, maybe they're looking for the visitor center or they're looking for the bathrooms or I don't know what, but maybe they needed help. So I tried to make eye contact, and the mother started changing the way she was walking and started walking my way, and I watched her as she got closer to me, kind of, and I said, is everything all right? And she said, no. So I was like, oh, what's going on? I was, and she said, oh, we can't find our car. And I was like, oh, gee, it is kind of weird. The parking at the Grand Canyon is, nice, but it's nighttime, and there's 4 different parking lots at the visitor center. Well, there's actually more than that. I think it's kind of a strange way they got it. And, there's, I think, parking lots 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you went there in the morning, spent all day, and now you're trying to find your car at night, it might be a thing. So I said, oh, call your husband over. And the husband and the kids came over to me, and I was like, what's going on? You can't find your car? And they were flustered, and I was like, well, listen, don't worry. Your car hasn't been stolen or anything. I just, the night before, I had talked to a park ranger, and he said in 9 years he worked there, they never had one car stolen. They never had any car broken into or anything like that. And I told them that, and they seemed to feel a little better. I said, how long you been looking for your car? And the dad said 40 minutes. I was like, eesh, that's a lot of walking around after a long day at the Grand Canyon. And I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we, me and the husband, me and dad, let's get in my car and we'll drive through all the parking lots looking for your car. And, we'll find your car and then you can get in and come back and kids will be on your way because they were almost in a panic. And they weren't sure about that, but I was kind of firm about it. I says, yeah, me and dad will go and you kids and mom and the kids, the visitor center's right there. And I pointed where there's some lights. And I said, visitor center's right there. There's bathrooms. You probably have to use the bathroom. You go with the bathrooms. Come right back here and wait. And we won't be long. We're driving around the parking lots. We'll find the car fast. So they decided to, yeah, okay, let's do that. I was like, because they at one point they were talking, well, listen, maybe we can catch a taxi or something and get back to our hotel, and then we'll come get the car tomorrow. I was like, nah, you don't need to do that. You'll be fine. So the dad was like, all right, even though I'm a big guy and he's a little guy. So we jumped in my car and we started driving the parking lot, looking around, and he had his little clicker for his car, beep beep, so he could kept clicking it to see if the car was anywhere nearby, and because when we get close to the car, it would, the lights would horn would go off and we'd be all set. So we drove parking lot one all the way like around the perimeter of it, and he said, I parked near the woods. So we drove the perimeter of one, and then we drove the perimeter of two, and we're getting further and further away now from where we actually were. I can see why they were walking around for 40 minutes. And then we drove all around the perimeter of parking lot three, and then we finally got to parking lot four, and we started driving all around the perimeter of it, and we heard a beep beep, and he was like, yes, that's it, that's my car. I was like, cool. So I drove up to it, and he got out, he thanked me, and got in his car. And so I said, well, let me drive back to parking lot one where I was parking so I can go do my camera stuff, my Milky Way stuff, So I did that. I drove back. And as I was getting all the stuff out of my car again, my lawn chair and my camera stuff and my tripod and all the things I had to lug around, they come driving by and they stopped the car and they were all like, hey, thank you very much. Hey, have a good night. And I was like, hey, you too. Good luck. And that was it. And so for me, the thing with relationships and experiences is, and I'll tell you the second story after I talk a little bit about give you a little bit of my soliloquy. Um, there's only really two things in the world, and that's the real point I want to make in this. And those two things are relationships and experiences. Really, everything else is fluff. Like in the modern world, we spend a lot of time pursuing a lot of things. You know, we have a lot of things that we chase after, and we work a lot to pay the mortgage or the rent and the car and the insurance and all these things, and to gather things and to have things and do things. But when it comes down to it, all of that stuff is extraneous because all you really have, the only things that are really tangible in your life are relationships that you develop with other people and even with animals, pets too, and experiences that you have in your life. And that's it. Keep that in mind as you're living your day. Like we often forget that. Like in the workplace, it's big in the workplace to forget it because you have work to do. But your work really comes down to the relationships you have with all the other people in your workplace, and whether it be an office or whether it be a warehouse or no matter where it be, it's actually all about the relationships. And your experiences in the workplace make you a more productive or a smarter or a faster or a better employee or worker, which further cultivates your relationship with others. So consider that. And my little story about the family at the Grand Canyon displays something in terms of even if those relationships are very short. So when you're living your life, which you're doing right now and you're always doing, try to aspire to what you believe is you as a better person, a richer you in terms of relationships, even if the relationship I'm never going to see these people ever again. But for the short period of time, I'd say 15 minutes that I interacted with that little family, it was a rich relationship and a rich experience for all of us. Because they clearly were on the verge of panicking because it was nighttime and it was nighttime, like, 9ish and dark, and the Grand Canyon and darker than a city because it was stargazing week. And but it still was. We left each other with a good relationship and a good experience. So consider that even with people that you only going to briefly know. And that brings me to another story uh, that I wanted to tell you. Well, I'm going to tell you a third story. Um, just thought of it. I remembered it. I had it in my notes and I forgot to say. But I was on an airplane a couple of years ago. And on the side of me it was a long flight, and on the side of me was a young man, and his, I don't know, 30ish, young man, just recently married, I think, and with a little child, and we struck up a conversation about this and that, and the the conversation came around to travel, and so I asked him a lot of questions about travel and what travel he's done, and I wasn't too surprised to find out because he had that kind of a feel to him that when he graduated college, he went off backpacking in the like the Tibet area, all those countries out there, like the pretty common like vision quest that a young backpacker might do straight out of college before they started in their life. You go backpacking around. Where is it? Tibet and Mongolia. I forget the countries he said. And I asked him. I said, which is really cool. I said, we're kind of like at opposite stages because you did it when you first got out of college, and me, I'm doing it later in my life. I'm doing this kind of a wandering around the world later in life. I said, so what did you glean from that? What summarize for me what came of that, this walking and hiking and all this time in a foreign land. And I forget how long he was gone, like 6 months or maybe more. And he said, he stopped and he thought about it and said, you know, along a backpacking like that, you meet a lot of people, and and it's sort of like a microcosm of your whole life because you some people come into your life and you walk with them on the path for a half an hour. Others you walk for a couple of hours. Others you spend the day, and some a few days. But eventually you part ways. So from that, I take you have to look at that in the larger scale of your whole life and understand it's the same thing. You you have relationships with people, and you experience things in your life and with them in common for a period of time. It could be pretty much your whole life, as if with friends and family and close friends, or it could be with work colleagues for a couple of years or a few months, or it could be with just somebody passing on the street, somebody at a meeting or at the library or wherever for a short period of time. But always strive to make it a rich experience regardless, as that other soul comes in and then out of your life. Um, that's important. So think about that. So let me tell you one more story, and this is kind of interesting. I'll end this all with the second Grand Canyon story that I was going to tell you. So after all of that, at the little family, that little 15-minute encounter I had with that little family, I gathered up all my stuff and my camera, my lawn chair, and my tripod, and all the various bric-a-brac that I had to take with me. I went out to the spot that you saw me in the video and shot a bunch of pictures of the Milky Way, and it was really, really wonderful. And I think I spent a couple hours there, and then I had scouted out another spot that I wanted to take some more pictures at and do some more astrophotography at. So I gathered up all my stuff and walked further out into the darkness, into this spot where there's a lot of trees and rocks, and set my camera up again in my lawn chair, and I started taking like a longer exposure. And by this time it was, I'm not sure what time, 11:30 at night. And walking down the path, not too far from where I was in the trees, was a bright flash, somebody with a bright flashlight getting closer and closer to me. And I was like, so I exclaimed, "Hey, watch the flashlight! I'm taking astro photos." And a young man, he said, "Oh, sorry about that." And he pointed his light down at the ground and really muffled it really hard so it wouldn't bother me. And I was like, "Thanks." And I guess I piqued his interest, or that little awkward encounter between the two of us kind of inspired him to come a little closer. And so and now it's in the dark, and I could hear his footfalls better than I could see him, but approach me. And there was no moon. And he got really much closer, and I could see he had stuff. He said, "Hey, I'm a photographer. I take a lot of astro photos and stuff." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Yeah, this is I got a nice spot here." And he said, "Mind if I set up? I'll take some shots here too." I was like, "Yeah, right. That's cool." So he had like a big case. He's like a real photographer, and like with a beautiful case with all kinds of nice equipment in it. And he started unpacking that and setting some stuff up. And all the while we were chatting, and all the while I couldn't barely see him. You know, he was for the most part just a voice and a faint silhouette. And for the most of the time, I'm just sitting in my lawn chair, taking a long exposure and trying different shots on my camera on my tripod right in front of me. And so we had this wonderful long conversation. It must have lasted an hour, maybe more. I think past midnight. And it was really enriching. It expounds on my point here that I want to make about relationships and experiences, but relationships especially. Here was this other person, I guess you could say soul, that came into my life, and I came into his too, for a period of time, an hour and a half, and there was still him there and me there, even though there was no sight involved. I just found that interesting that we had this wonderful conversation about telling stories about what we had done and different things. And I'll tell you a little bit about his stories. It's kind of fun. So he became a being without actually having any physical presence, really. Just the words he spoke breathed life into him as a real thing. And we developed a nice conversation and a short term but nice relationship. It was wonderful, uh, even though I couldn't see him. And that's pretty much my point. So you in your life you're going to see most of the people that you encounter, but think about even on the shortest times in the shortest relationships how you make it a good experience. Why wouldn't you? Well, you wouldn't because in the world we live in, we're so oftentimes we're very busy. We get a task, a mission. We're human doings and rather than human beings, right? Uh, well, it really that time is not that usually not that urgent to stop and pause and talk to somebody or to think in your head, hey, this brief time that I'm with this person or these people, how do I make it the richest possible? So it was fun, and let me. Uh, that's it. I wanted let me tell you a couple of stories that he told me. He's a photographer, and he does a lot of photography, and he loves to take night photos. He's got he does a lot of like Milky Way stuff too. Well, I don't do a lot, but he does a lot of Milky Way stuff. He does all kinds of photography, and he'll tell me stories about how adventuring out at night in all these dark places away from the city. How he runs into different adventures. Or this one time he was between him and the parking lot where his car was parked at this one place. How the park ranger had just told him that there were a lot of elk around. To be careful because they can be dangerous. And so he noticed at one point he heard noises, and between him and this parking lot, his like 12 pairs of eyes started looking at him And he got really panicked because he thought it probably was elk because the ranger had just warned him, and it ended up to be deer, which will scamper off, you know. So, and then about another time to get the shot he wanted to really get late at night in the dark with no light, he had to get to within 3 feet of a cliff. How that was a big thing, you know. But he got the shot that he wanted to get. So and I said, hey, you know, this is be a great book, you know, Adventures in Astrophotography. You know, the things that astrophotographers go through late at night in the dark in abandoned places to just to try to get the shot they need to get of the moon or the Milky Way of the stars, you know. So we laughed. But that was, you know, and that's how I pretty much capped off that day at the Milky Way. You know, I, and well, no, and to cap it off, I was spent hours under a pristine, beautiful, deep, rich, dark, cloudless and moonless night when the Milky Way was just vibrant. It was like diamonds in the sky. And if you've watched that other video, you've seen some of the pictures. And I encourage you to click the link to go to my website to look at more pictures of the Milky Way that I took. You know, it just it was just you know wonderful. The mystery of it all. So as a relationship, the experience of me experiencing those people and experiencing the night sky at its most beautiful and the Milky Way in all its grandeur, which is the whole galaxy we live in. I experienced that night too, and I guess in some small way, um, there was a maybe you never know. Maybe there was a give and take back and forth between me and the Milky Way galaxy. You know, maybe the Milky Way galaxy definitely enriched my life that night, and maybe in some small way I enriched its life. Okay, so thanks. That's another episode of Fish and Chips. You know, I do enjoy these fish and chips, and if you listened all the way through to here, I thank you for valuing my words. And even though my relationship with you isn't really a two-way relationship, or maybe it is. It's hard to really say. The mysterious way the universe works, right? The mysterious way in which the Milky Way galaxy works. You know, maybe there's a back and forth to my relationship with you, but I want to say that these Friday Fish and Chips, in a way, are kind of like me giving you a little ride around the parking lots of life, and just I guess you could say helping you out a little bit. That's kind of strong to say helping you out, but offering you some tidbits from my life that you may find useful in your life. That's a better way to say it, you know. As you're traveling around the parking lot of your life, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, um, I'm happy to do these fish and chips and just give you a little ride in my car.